Hello, it's Joanne from St. Dunstan's back again. Um, Sorry I had to take a little break, but now we're going to continue with Island of the Blue Dolphins, chapters 3 through chapter 5. What I read in you in the first video were the first two chapters. Uh, so here we go again. Chapter 3. The wide beds of kelp which surround our island on three sides came close to the shore and spread out to sea for a distance of a league. In these deep beds, even on days of heavy winds, the Aleuts hunted. They left the shore at dawn in their skin canoes and did not return until midnight, towing after them the slain otter. The sea otter, when it is swimming, looks like a seal, but it really is very different. It has a shorter nose than a seal, small webbed feet instead of flippers, and fur that is thicker and much more beautiful. It is also different in other ways. The otter likes to lie back in the kelp beds, floating up and down to the motion of the waves, sunning itself, or sleeping. They are the most playful animals in the sea. It was these creatures that the Aleuts hunted for their pelts. From the cliff I could see the skin canoes darting here and there over the kelp beds, barely skimming the waters, and long spears flying like arrows. At dark, the hunters brought their catch into Coral Cove, and there on the beach the animals were skinned and fleshed. Two men, who also sharpened the spears, did this work, laboring far into the night, by the light of seaweed fires. In the morning the beach would be strewn with carcasses, and the waves red with blood. Many of our tribe went to the cliff each night to count the number killed during the day. They counted the dead otter and thought of the beads and other things that each pelt meant. But I never went to the cove, and whenever I saw the hunters with their long spears skimming over the water, I was angry, for these animals were my friends. It was fun to see them playing or sunning themselves among the kelp. It was more fun than the thoughts of beads to wear around my neck. This I told my father one morning. There are scarcely a dozen left in the beds around Coral Cove, I said. Before the Aleuts came, there were many. Many still live in other places around the island, he replied, laughing at my foolishness. When the hunters leave, they will come back. There will be none left, I said. The hunters will kill them all. This morning they hunt on the south. Next week they move to another place. The ship is filled with pelts. In another week the Aleuts will be ready to go. I was sure that my father thought they would leave soon, for 2 days before he had sent some of our young men to the beach to build a canoe from a log which had drifted in from the sea. There are no trees on the island, except the small ones stunted by the wind. When a log comes ashore, as happened once in a long time, it was always carried to the village and worked on where a chance wave could not wash it away. That the men were sent to hollow out the log in the cove and to sleep beside it during the night meant that they were there to watch the Aleuts, to give the alarm should Captain Orlov try to sail off without paying us for the otter skins. Everyone was afraid he might. So besides the men in the cove who watched the Aleut ship, others kept watch on the camp. Every hour someone brought news. Eulapi said that the Aleut women spent a whole afternoon cleaning her skin aprons, which she had not done before while she had been there. Early that morning, Ramos said he had just seen Captain Orlov carefully trimming his beard so that it looked the way it did when he first came. The Aleuts who sharpened the long spears stopped this work and gave all their time to skinning the otter which were brought in at dusk. We in the village of Galas-At knew that Captain Orlov and his hunters were getting ready to leave the island. Would he pay us for the otter he had slain, or would he try to sneak away in the night? Would our men have to fight for our rightful share? These questions everyone asked while the Aleuts went about their preparations. Everyone except my father, who said nothing, but each night worked on the new spear he was making. Chapter 4. The Aleuts left on a sunless day. Out of the north, the deep rolls rolled down upon the island. They broke against the rocks and roared into the caves, sending up white sprays of water. Before night, a storm would certainly strike. Not long after dawn, the Aleuts took down their skin tents and carried them to the beach. Captain Orlov had not paid my father for the otter he had killed. So when the news came that the hunters had packed their tents, all of our tribe left the village and hurried toward Coral Cove. The men with their weapons went first, and the women followed. The men took the trail that led to the beach, but the women hid themselves among the brush on the cliff. Eulapi and I went together far out on the ledge where I had hidden before when the hunters first came. The tide was low, and the rocks and the narrow beach were scattered with bundles of otter pelts. Half of the hunters were on the ship. The rest were wading into the water, tossing their pelts into a boat. The Aleuts laughed while they worked, as if they were happy to leave the island. My father was talking to Captain Orlov. I could not hear their words because of the noise the hunters made, but from the way my father shook his head, I knew that he was not pleased. "He is angry," Eulapi whispered. "Not yet," I said. "When he's really angry, he pulls his ear." The men who were working on the canoe had stopped and were watching my father and Captain Orlov. The other men of our tribe stood at the foot of the trail. The boat went off to the ship filled with otter. As it reached the ship, Captain Orlov raised his hand and gave a signal. When the boat came back, it held a black chest which two of the hunters carried to the beach. Captain Orlov raised the lid and pulled out several necklaces. There was little light in the sky, yet the beads sparkled as he turned them this way and that. Beside me, Eulapi drew in her breath in excitement, and I could hear the cries of delight from the women hidden in the brush. But the cries suddenly ceased as my father shook his head and turned his back on the chest. The Aleuts stood silent. Our men left their places at the foot of the trail and moved forward a few steps and waited, watching my father. "One string of beads for one otter pelt is not our bargain," my father said. "One string and one iron spearhead," said Captain Orlov, lifting two fingers. "The chest does not hold that much," my father answered. "There are more chests on the ship," said the Russian. "Then bring them to the shore," my father said. "You have 105 bales of otter on the ship. There are 15 here in the cove. You will need 3 more chests of this size." Captain Orlov said something to his Aleuts that I could not understand, but its meaning was soon clear. There were many hunters in the cove, and as soon as he spoke, they began to carry the otter pelts to the boat. Beside me, Eulapi was scarcely breathing. "Do you think that he will give us the other chests?" she whispered. "I do not trust him. When he gets the pelts to the ship, he may leave. It is possible." The hunters had to pass my father to reach the boat, and when the first one approached him, he stepped in his path. "The rest of the pelts must stay here," he said, facing Captain Orlov, "until the chests are brought." The Russian drew himself up stiffly and pointed to the clouds that were blowing in toward the island. "I load the ships before the storm arrives," he said. "Give us the other chests, then I will help you with your canoes," my father replied. Captain Orlov was silent. His gaze moved slowly around the cove. He looked at our men standing on the ledge of rock a dozen paces away. He looked upward toward the sky and back at my father. He spoke to his Aleuts. I do not know what happened first, whether it was my father who raised his hand against the hunter whose path he barred, whether it was this man who stepped forward with a bale of pelts on his back and shoved my father aside. It all happened so quickly that I could not tell one act from the other. But as I jumped to my feet and Ulapi screamed and other cries sounded along the cliff, I saw a figure lying on the rocks. It was my father, and blood was on his face. Slowly he got to his feet. With their spears raised, our men rushed down across the ledge. A puff of white smoke came from the deck of the ship. A loud noise echoed against the cliff. 5 of our warriors fell and lay quiet. Ulapi screamed again and flung a rock into the cove. It fell harmlessly beside Captain Orlov. Rocks showered into the cove from many places along the cliff, striking several of the hunters. Then our warriors rushed in upon them, and it was hard to tell one from the other. Ulapi and I stood on the cliff and watched helplessly, afraid to do the rocks we held lest we injure our own men. The Aleuts had dropped the bales of otter. They drew their knives from their belts, and as our warriors rushed upon them, the 2 lines surged back and forth along the beach. Men fell to the sand and rose to fight again. Others fell and did not get up. My father was one of these. For a long time, it seemed that we would win the battle. But Captain Orlov, who had rowed off to the ship when the battle started, returned with more of his Aleuts. Our warriors were forced backward to the cliffs. There were few of them left, yet they fought at the foot of the trail and would not retreat. The wind began to blow. Suddenly, Captain Orlov and his Aleuts turned and ran to the boat. Our men did not pursue them. The hunters reached the ship, the red sails went up, and the ship moved slowly between the 2 rocks that guard the cove. Once more, before it disappeared, a white puff of smoke rose from the deck. As Ulapi and I ran along the cliff, a whirring sound like a great bird in flight passed above our heads. The storm struck as we ran, driving rain into our faces. Then other women were running beside us, and their cries were louder than the wind. At the bottom of the trail, we came upon our warriors. Many had fought on the beach. Few had left it, and all of these were wounded. My father lay on the beach, and the waves were already washing over him. Looking at his body, I knew he should not have told Captain Orlov his secret name. And back in our village, all the weeping women and the sad men agreed that this had so weakened him that he had not lived through the fight with the Aleuts and the dishonest Russian. Chapter 5. That night was the most terrible time in all the memory of Galas-At. When the fateful day had dawned, the tribe numbered 42 men, counting those who were too old to fight. When night came, and the women carried back to the village those who had died on the beach of Coral Cove, there remained only 15. Of these, 7 were old men. There was no woman who had not lost a father or a husband, a brother, or a son. The storm lasted 2 days, and the 3rd day we buried our dead on the south headland. The Aleuts who had fallen on the beach we burned. For many days after that, the village was quiet. People went out only to gather food and came back to eat in silence. Some wished to leave and go in their canoes to the island called Santa Catalina, which lies far off to the east. But others said that there was little water on that island. In the end, a council was held, and it was decided to stay at Galas-At. The council also chose a new chief to take my father's place. His name was Kimki. Excuse me. He was very old, but he had been a good man in his youth and a good hunter. The night he was chosen to be chief, he called everyone together, saying, "Most of those who snared fowl and found fish in the deep water and built canoes are gone. The women, who were never asked to do more than stay at home, cook food, and make clothing, now must take the place of the men and face the dangers which abound beyond the village. There will be grumbling in Galasat because of this. There will be shirkers. These will be punished, for without the help of all must perish." Kimki portioned work for each one in the tribe, giving Ulapi and me the task of gathering abalone. This shellfish grew on the rocks along the shore and was plentiful. We gathered them at low tide in baskets and carried them to the mesa, where we cut the dark red flesh from the shell and placed it on flat rocks to dry in the sun. Remo had the task of keeping the abalone safe from the gulls, and especially the wild dogs. Dozens of our animals, which had left the village when their owners had died, joined the wild pack that roamed the island. They soon grew as fierce as the wild ones and only came back to the village to steal food. Each day toward evening, Ulapi and I helped Remo put the abalone in baskets and carry them to the village for safekeeping. During this time, other women were gathering the scarlet apples that grow on the cactus bushes and are called tunas. Fish were caught and many birds were netted. So hard did the women work that we really fared better than before when the hunting was done by the men. Life in the village should have been peaceful, but it was not. The men said that the women had taken the tasks that rightfully were theirs, and now that they had become hunters, the men looked down upon them. There was much more trouble over this until Kimki decreed that the work would again be divided. Henceforth the men would hunt and the women harvest. Since there was already ample food to last through the winter, it no longer mattered who hunted. But this was not the real reason why autumn and winter were unpeaceful in Galasat. Those who had died at Coral Cove were still with us. Everywhere we went, on the island or on the sea, whether we were fishing or eating or sitting by the fires at night, they were with us. We all remembered someone, and I remembered my father, so tall and strong and kind. A few years ago, my mother had died, and since then, Ulapi and I had tried to do the tasks she had done. Ulapi, even more than I, being older. Now that my father was gone, it was not easy to look after Remo, who was always into some mischief. It was the same in the other houses of Galasat, but more than the burdens which had fallen upon us all, it was the memory of those who had gone that burdened our hearts. After food had been stored in autumn and the baskets were full in every house, there was more time to think about them, so that a kind of sickness came over the village, and people sat and did not speak, nor even laughed. In the spring, Kimki called the tribe together. He had been thinking, he said, during the winter, and had decided that he would take a canoe and go to the east to a country which was there, and which he had once been to when he was a boy. It lay many days across the sea, but he would go there and make a place for us. He would go alone, because he could not spare more of our men for the voyage, and he would return. The day after Kimki left was fair. We all went to the cove and watched him launch the big canoe. It held 2 baskets of water and enough tunas and dried abalone to last many days. We watched while Kimki paddled through the narrow opening in the rocks. Slowly he went through the kelp beds and into the sea. There he waved to us, and we waved back. The rising sun made a silver trail across the water. Along this trail he disappeared into the east. The rest of the day we talked about the journey. Would Kimki ever reach this far country about which nothing was known? Would he come back before the winter was over? Or never? That night we sat around the fire and talked while the wind blew and the waves crashed against the shore. Okay, folks, I have to take another break, but I will be back soon with some more of the Island of the Blue Dolphins. Thank you. Hope you've enjoyed it so far.